Normally I try to have 4 or 5, but I thought this time let's get these 6 perspectives in because they're all very unique and different and awesome, and that's basically what the game industry is like, making games. There's a lot of different talent that goes into it, a lot of different stages. So kind of pretty interesting perspective here for you guys today. So first of all, my name is Ben Reichert. I run Game Collab, and we're doing once again the Southwest Video Game Showcase. So if you go to the lower level Hall 1 e-gaming area, we're booth 618, and I've got about 15 different independent game developers there. You guys can go check out their games and play them. Actually, right now we're also running a tournament currently with Offensive Combat. It's not one that you can enter because we already had the teams made. It's a 5v5, so I didn't know how many 5-player teams we could make randomly here at Comic Fest. But we've got teams from ASU, GCU, UAT, Broadcast Phoenix, Stream AZ, Team Meteor and stuff. So it's pretty cool. Check it out today, and then going on tomorrow, and the end of it will be tomorrow. And also, I have more of these upstairs, but these are kind of our programming that we do. So yesterday we did an Arizona video game industry panel. Today it's getting into games. Tomorrow we've got one on esports. That'll be at 1:30. And then we also have a screening of our documentary we made called Game Jam the Movie, which is, again, kind of continuation from what we'll talk about here. But if you want to see what a game jam looks like, and a game jam is basically like a hackathon, but for game making, so 48 hours, get people together over the weekend, you give them a theme, and they get together and create a team and make games. We did that 2 years ago, and that one we filmed, and we sent the winners to LA to IndieCade, where they got to meet Oculus, PlayStation, Cartoon Network, and pitch their games. And some of those went on to get onto the Oculus platform, and are currently available online. And yeah, we made a documentary about it, so it's pretty fun. It's called Game Jam the Movie. You can join us for that screening tomorrow night. And then Sunday, 3 to 4, we're going to do an award ceremony for all the developers that we have here showcasing. It's usually like audience choice, best in show, things like that. So if you guys want to join us for that, we'd love to have you there. Again, any more of that information I can tell you, or we have it upstairs. What else do I want to tell you? Oh yeah, tomorrow night we're going to also do a mixer over at the park. That's going to feature some game developers and their games. Chris will be there with his game, and a couple of others, and you can play those, check them out, and then also just basically network with other game developers. So most of the people who are at the showcase, and then beyond that, kind of Arizona folks will be there. So again, if you want to talk one-on-one with some more game developers, that'll be tomorrow night at the park, which is literally like a block away. So, kicking off, of course, here my screen went away. Not like I don't know every single person on this panel. So, first we have Roger Arias here from Screaming Games. Then we have Brad Bowling, right, from Rainbow. Then we have David Koontz, who's now Woz U. We have Brendan Sewell over at Eline Media. Chris Zakowski at Return to Adventure Mountain. And George, what's your name?
You're right.
Yeah. He's at University of Advancing Technology, George Portillo. What I wanted to do today, because again we have so many of them, I kind of wanted to just tee up a little bit by having them introduce what they do and where they've been, and then spend most of the time answering questions. So first of all, raise a hand. Who is currently making video games? That's all of us, don't worry. Okay, who is interested in making video games? Okay, cool, awesome. So yeah, so that's kind of who you have to play to. So we'll start, I guess, first here with Roger, if you want to talk about, just again, synopsis of where you've been, what you've seen, and what you do now. Yeah, they're all on.
Okay, I'm with Screaming Games now. It's my own company. Started recently, a few years ago actually, but we're coming out with our first game. It's a dirt track racing game in a couple months. And I've been with Atari, THQ, worked with Bandai Studios. I've done about close to 100 games now, about 25 years. I started with Duke Nukem in this town with Warm Gen. So
wow, that's awesome.
A long time ago.
That's cool. How in this town?
How long?
Yeah, I mean in this town. Oh yeah, with Mario.
We had Mario, so Warm Gen. We did Duke Nukem. We had Rise of the Triad, Terminal Velocity, things like that.
That's right. Cool.
Cool. I'm Brad Bowling. I'm the art director for Rainbow Studios. We just shipped MX vs. ATV All Out, which is in downstairs. You got into the games industry in 2000 and worked for High Voltage Software and then Rainbow Studios when it was owned by THQ before. And then I worked for EA Sports on the Madden franchise, and now back to Rainbow Studios. So I'm the art director of the studio, so I get to yell at artists all day, which is great.
I'm David Koontz. My history is mostly through indie games, so I got in just sort of on my own, went to school, did indie games on and off, both professionally and hobby-wise, and then I've spent most of my career as a software engineer and then also teaching both game development and sort of in the more general software engineering field, and that's why I'm currently director of curriculum at Woz U with their programs.
I'm Brendan Sewell, the creative director of Eline Media. Working on a game called The Endless Mission, which you can also play downstairs, a creation sandbox game. I got my start actually through game modding, so Neverwinter Nights campaigns, Counter-Strike maps. First started getting paid for it in 2010 making educational games. Then I joined Eline Media in 2013 as creative director, spent a lot of time establishing the creative vision for the game, spending a lot of time in production meetings, documentation, but also occasionally enjoying times getting my hands dirty in the programming as well.
Hi, my name is Chris Zukowski. I'm an independent developer, which means I make everything except the art. I hire some folks for the art. But I'm what you would call a moonlighter, where I have a full-time corporate job, still working for the man. But then at nights, weekends, I make my own games. I've released 4 games for iOS. And I've got a new one coming out for Steam very soon.
All right, this is a long one. I'm an associate professor at the University of Advanced Technology. My core focus is game art and animation. I was in the industry for about 2 to 3 years doing more or less online casual type games. I got tired of getting yelled at, so I quit and became an educator, and I do all the yelling.
Good turn. Yeah, I mean, so as you see, it's quite diverse where they came from, where they're at currently. And again, I think on that spirit, I would just like to start opening it up and see where this conversation goes, because I know there are a lot of different nuances to the game industry, and you might be maybe what kind of engine should you use, or what kind of genre should you look at, all these kind of things. So is there anybody that has an opening question of any kind? Curious? Yeah.
For games like, let's just go with Elder Scrolls, any larger RPG style type game, anything like that, is everything in the game a huge ass list of if-then statements, or is it chunked into a different type of format?
Is that programmer?
I can speak to that.
Defer
So,
to the program.
generally speaking, you're going to have a certain number of systems in there. So you'll have different kinds of AI for like your NPCs, and you might have like a day-night weather system kind of a thing. So those are not just giant lists of if-thens. They're a little more sophisticated than that. Think of it more like a system of constraints that kind of pull against each other and kind of find an equilibrium where things are balanced. And it's the designer's job, like something Brendan, when we work together, would often do is I would give him a pile of knobs, and then he would have to go and tune them to get the kind of effect that we wanted. And sometimes he'd come back to me and say, hey, I need knobs to affect these things because the ones you gave me don't quite get the effect that we're looking for. So at some level, there's a bunch of if-thens, yes, but at the bigger scale, you're not just thinking of it as this giant kind of conditional tree. It's a little more nuanced than that.
You had a question? Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of like a technical question though, because I'm kind of stuck on something right now. Because like, I don't know crap about coding. Like I got this program called RPG Maker MV, and I'm trying to do transformations, right? So I finally got them to transform, but then the game crashed. So I'm trying to figure out what's the problem with this. I know what's up with the code.
That sounds like just game development in general. Right? Anybody use RPG Maker? No. Sorry about that.
It's fine though.
That is a good. That is a good place though to point out. What got you into RPG Maker? How did you just?
The thing is, it was just on sale on Steam, and like I have like a lot of ideas on games and stuff, but like I have an artist that's upstairs, and he said if I learn coding, he'll be my artist.
Okay.
So like
Fair
I got
enough.
stories going on, I got characters, I just need to work on this game,
Okay.
get it to work. So I got to figure out the coding part.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, one of the fascinating things about the industry currently is that it's almost been democratized to a degree in the sense that a lot of the game engines, Unity, Unreal, are now subscription-based. Even things like RPG Maker are relatively cheap. you can get your hands on these things pretty readily and easily and start then dabbling and working on it yourself. But yeah, finding artists or partnering up and teaming with people is always, that's kind of a kicker.
I would say one thing to your situation there is that if you're sort of like, oh, I need to figure out like the programming side, like they're going to do the art side, I'm going to do the programming side. RPG Maker will have specific things that you have to worry about in that system. Same with Unity or Unreal or Homegrown Engine. Once you learn programming kind of as a general discipline, much of that will translate from system to system. So if you look at it as an opportunity to learn programming more broadly and less the specifics of RPG Maker, if you go to Game Maker or Unity or something else, you can take a fair chunk of that with you. So I would just encourage you to see it less about like solving the individual problem you're having and more about like, what is the overall idea I'm not understanding here, if it's a little bit larger scale of a thing. And if you can gain those skills, that will carry with you and be useful long term.
I was thinking about that. Also, I was wondering if there any type of 2D software, like you know how popular the retro style games are nowadays, like 8 and 16-bit. I also trying to do that because I want to revive Koontz in some way. It's going to take action. I want to bring that back.
Yeah.
So I can answer to that. So in my 100 level class, we pretty much go over your iconic retro type art style, the pixel art. We focus on about 7.5 weeks roughly on that. Then we transition to another 2D production art, which is called vector art. And you're using more or less Photoshop to develop either your pixel art tools or your pixel art in general. Vector art as well, we can more or less use an Illustrator. Now to mesh this together and to help with your programming issue, us artists are just terrible at programming. So we use what we call visual scripting. What visual scripting is essentially drag and drop functions to help create said thing, like player walk this way, player jump this way. And a good tool for that is Construct 3. It's open source, you can download it. It'll give you about 50 lines of events that you can use. And it'll give you just enough to create a really cool functional prototype, if that's your goal. If you desire to go above and beyond that, go into market and ship, I would highly suggest purchasing it. It's pretty affordable. I mean, depending on what you want to ship to, the prices range, but I think just to get your hands dirty, for the most part, 40, 50 bucks goes a long way with that software. So,
It's actually a really good tool.
yeah.
Thank you guys.
Game Maker is another one that
Yeah.
easier to get into.
Okay.
I know I'm not the only one in this room like this, but for those of us who have more of like a traditional computer science, computer programming background, what's one of the first things that we can get into to learn more about programming for games beyond the basic object-oriented programming that we learn in school?
It's on you, Dave.
See, I said I wasn't going to talk too much, and then so fundamentally, programming for games is not different. It's the same. You're solving the same kinds of problems. You have data structures. You're having to manipulate that to have a certain kind of output. Just pick one. It doesn't matter what it is. Pick Game Maker or Unity or Unreal. Probably depending on the languages you're familiar with. So if you're more in the C++ realm, obviously Unreal fits very nicely for that. If you're more like C# Java, you might find Unity a better fit for that. Game Maker has their own language. You could just use JavaScript and use something like Photon or something like, or Phaser.
Yeah, there's a library for Java that I'm looking into using for what I want to do.
So the one thing I would say about Java is traditionally it does not have a very strong culture around game development. So there's not a lot of resources. You'll find a much stronger ecosystem in the C# world.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not, no judgment on languages there. I'm just saying like the people who are into game development tend to be more in the C# realm than in the Java realm.
Yeah,
But
I've totally got that feeling.
my advice would be just pick something very small. Pick something you think you can do in a weekend. In a weekend, maybe even a single day, and do that first. And in a month, you'll be done with it, and you'll learn a ton.
Wise words.
I guess this is more a question for our Moonlighter. For those of us that are still kind of like starting to get into the field, that's kind of what we're doing, is we're working to make a living, and then we're doing game on the side. What's a good time management strategy?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
I would say just set your goals. I mean, I also have almost a 2-year-old that I'm also kind of juggling too, so his time kind of dominates a lot. But really what you want to do is set a goal, like, hey, I'm going to wake up at 4 and work an hour until 5, and then I'll work from 9 to 10. So you set that goal of, hey, I'm going to do 2 hours today. And then on weekends, maybe I'll do 5 hours, something like that. You just set that goal and you work and just turn off everything and just say, hey, I'm going to jam on it for this hour, and then just track your time. I write down everything that I did in that hour, and that just kind of lets me know, hey, I got my goal of 10 hours a week, and so I kind of knocked out and I hit that goal. So that's a good way of just kind of tracking and keeping yourself honest.
Thank you.
Do you have any recommended engines for a game jam?
I'd have to recommend Unreal. It's a commercial engine, and I think it's free at this point. For a game jam, you can just pick it up, and like anything that you learn in there, you'll be able to use in any engine. And the resources available to you, you can just go online, type in what you want to learn, figure it out. They have videos, they have everything you need to know. So that would be my recommendation.
Brandon wrote a book about it.
No.
Yeah, so I would second that as well. One of the advantages of Unreal Engine is it has a system called Blueprints, which was mentioned before, visual scripting system, so allows you to go a bit into coding enough that you can get stuff displayed on screen, start building gameplay systems without having to worry about the syntax of code quite as much, but you're still using all of the same concepts and those skills will transfer. Unity doesn't have a built-in equivalent, but is also considered probably most people's go-to game jam engine once they reach a certain point of expertise. So it's also very accessible. You can find a tremendous, overwhelming number of online tutorials around that as well. What the advantage of using a really commonly used sort of commercial viable system like Unity or like Unreal is pretty much most of the entry-level questions you'll have. How can I make a character that does X? How can I get this ball to roll a certain way? Why am I running into this error? A simple Google search will turn up 30 people who've had the same problem you're encountering for your game jam, and they'll be able to point you to a solution for that.
I use GameMaker, and I'd highly recommend that one too. I mean, the other thing is, like with a Unity or a GameMaker, they always have these really great built-in tutorials. And so before your game jam, go through those built-in tutorials, and they're great. They'll have like the ball rolling. You'll probably make Breakout or Tetris within these tutorials, and they're really good. So you get that kind of scope set.
Yeah, so this past January at the university, we held our global game jam. We had about 125 roughly developers, I think close to 20 some plus games. And they all use a variety of engines. As they alluded to, we definitely had some Unreal, we had Unity, GameMaker, and even Construct. It just depends really on what you're trying to create or what you more adapt to. Usually the case goes with game jams. People more or less cater towards what the programmer wants to do, and then everything else just kind of goes in, plug and play type thing. But yeah, those are all the engines that are, at your disposal, and they're free. So it's pretty awesome to kind of download and check out. And if you have any troubleshooting, there's forums. I mean, the gaming community is just so awesome. If you have any type of issues whatsoever, you go to these forums and you'll find your answer immediately if you're ever stuck or you have some impediment.
So I'm a teacher here and a bunch of students, and I keep hearing over and over, well, I can't do math or I can't do programming. I don't understand the difference between can and don't want to. What would you say to them? They still want to get in the game, but they think it's all coding, all math.
So I've got a perfect story for that. So I just went back to my hometown, and being an artist, I failed out of geometry twice. So, right, so 3D is the perfect thing for you to go into if you failed out of geometry twice. And one of my good friends, his wife, is the geometry teacher, and so I got to go see my old school and talk to some of the kids about how 3D works and how someone who failed out of geometry twice actually uses math all the time, and it makes a lot of sense to them. When you see it, when you're looking at it from a standpoint of like, okay, there's a word problem, and whatever, Jane leaves California in a train going, 100 miles an hour. Who cares? Like, to me, that was my thing. I don't care. But when you see it in a practical sense, where like, hey, this character that you're looking at on the screen, like in Pixar movies or whatever, the core part of that is a polygon. You can break that down to this tiny little thing. And when you see the creative side of that, and how to sculpt that, and how to actually be artistic with that, it totally clicks with people. And especially like, the kids use Cartesian coordinate systems in like probably the 4th grade or something like that now. And really, you're adding Z to that, essentially. And I've actually sat down with some of my son's friends when they were growing up, and I'm like, you've learned this, you already learned this. And you'll plot out a couple points on a graph and be like, okay, it doesn't look like much, but when you add a Z value to it, you have a cube, and you can take that cube and subdivide it, and put legs on it, and now it's a character, and it's fun. So I think when people see it in that standpoint, that math can be, really a creative thing and a purpose-driven thing, they get a lot more out of it.
Anybody else want to add anything on something like that?
I just had a question. Are you saying like these are students who want to do the programming side but feel like they can't because it's all math? Or is it just games in general?
Some of them are that, and some of them are just, well, they'd like to get into it, but they think it's all that, like other fields that aren't programming also.
Sure. So for the programming related ones, I can speak to them a little bit. If once you're through algebra, there's a little bit of linear algebra. If you're going to do 3D, it's very small, a little bit of trigonometry. It's stuff that once you want to learn it, because you're like, hey, the ball's bouncing off the paddle at the wrong angle, you're now very highly motivated to learn some trigonometry. Now it really makes sense of, SOHCAHTOA, like, I got it now. Like, this has new meaning for me. So contextualizing it might be a way to sort of like show that it's not scary if you learn it sort of for a purpose that's intrinsically interesting to you.
Well, let me add a caveat to that, because maybe you were taken this way, maybe I wasn't sure if you were. But there's all aspects of making games. It's not all just the math part of the programming. When I was working with Atari, it was business development. Okay, but I got very involved with the design of the games too, because I didn't like certain things. I had to work with a developer and say, can we do this and that, and pretty soon you get your hands in it. And when I started my own company here, we started from scratch. We started with whiteboards. And when you're an indie company, you do everything. You're emptying the trash, you're drawing, you're doing everything. But you're not really. I'm not a coder. I have some who codes, but that's only one aspect. So I have a Russian artist, for example, that's 3D models and such. But much of it is for me is involved with game design. It's not just designing it, but you have to. Something you mentioned. Somebody said an hour a day. Do you do 10 hours a week? I would suggest, I just caveat a little bit of that. I would like to put, if you can, link in 2 hours at least together, because I have kids. Okay? And if I get interrupted every 15 minutes, I can't concentrate enough about what I'm doing to actually really start to go someplace with it. So if you sit down in really short intervals, it takes you a while for your brain to load all this into memory. Okay, this is how I work. I have to get all this stuff in my head when I'm doing a very complex design, because there's a lot of dependencies in games, right? And so if you're just barely loaded into your head and then you have to quit, you don't really progress very quickly. But if you can sit down for 2 hours uninterrupted, then you load all the stuff in your head first, and then you can start to work with it, and then you see all the problems that you wouldn't catch if you didn't have it all in your head to begin with. So I know that's just my point.
Yeah. Go ahead.
That answers the question.
Yeah.
It's mainly about engaging or trying to get them to show passion
Sure.
about something.
What I would suggest, I interface with a lot of high school students that want to come into, a field of study where it's either game art, game programming, game design, even business management type things. Get them to a game jam. That's going to give them the best experience on maybe even want them to do more, or maybe they don't want to do it. But this is a good experience where they can pretty much work in the trenches for 48 hours, don't get no sleep, and just work on this game. And if that's something they love to do and they're passionate about it, then that's the right choice for them.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here answering all these questions. I'm not a programmer, I'm an audio engineer, and Woz U, I'm a little bit of a sound designer. And all the people I know are audio people, I don't really know programmers. And I was wondering what advice you could give for somebody to locate and to get in with game designers who need music or audio side of things, and also what game designers, particularly on the low budget or indie side, are looking from an audio person or from a music composer.
Unless you can actually answer.
I mean, it could, but you guys are the panel.
I can take that. I can take this. For somebody trying to break in like yourself with audio, I mean, there's a lot of audio folks in there. The weird thing is when you put out a game, you get hit up every day with an email from an audio person saying, hey, do you need sound for your game? Like, it's just a weird thing. I mean, not a weird thing, but it happens. So what I would recommend, and I don't trust a lot of them because I don't know if they can get the stuff done. What I would do in your case is make sound packs and upload them to the various marketplaces. Like Unity has an asset store, there's like Game Dev Marketplace, there's all these online marketplaces. Make a game in your mind and like draw it out, and then just make sound effects for this imaginary game. But make it to types, like make all the sounds for an imaginary RPG, make all the sounds for an imaginary match 3, all these genres, and then upload them as a sound pack and sell it for whatever you want, like 10, 20 bucks or something. And what that shows me is a lot of times, like because I do everything, I will download sound packs. And if the sound pack is good quality and it has all this good stuff, I'll say, man, this person's great, and I'll actually track down that person and then hire them because I know they can do good stuff, they deliver, they don't flake out on me. So prove your worth by actually doing it and just make this fake game, but do all the sound effects for it because I want to see a complete package. And then people will download that. You might not be able to live off those packs, but you're going to signal to game devs, like, I'm somebody who can complete stuff. And I really highly look for people who complete packs.
One extension that I'll say to that is you can take one step forward beyond just the sound pack and actually build a miniature game where you can hear those sounds in context, because a lot of what we're looking for in sound engineering and sound and audio design is somebody that's going to be able to roll with the game development and understand the way that their piece of audio that they've created is used within the context of a game. So if you can take an sample environment that you can find on the asset store, if you're using something like Unity's, take a sample player controller, and then shape sounds around a soundscape of an environment itself, it kind of proves that you have the skills and sort of the mindset of game development that can help you stand apart from other audio engineers who are looking to build into the same field.
So the audio guys that you work with, do they need to know FMOD or WISE before they work with you, or they need to be versed in one of those in order to work with you and as far as
Yeah, so at Elon we've worked with a variety of contractors, some of which who have taken care of what we call the audio engineering, which is more the implementation of the sound effects in the context of the game directly, in which case they have used an FMOD sort of expertise that they built within Studio. But we've certainly also worked with contractors where we've relied on our own internal engineering department to do the implementation of the sounds, and it's more of a handoff process. But either way, you're working directly and collaboratively with the design team to understand the context in which that audio is going to be used, and it is a design-driven experience. So that sort of depends on the individual contractor as to whether they want to offer up that expertise. It's definitely a value add. You can certainly demand more in terms of financial return if you're also offering the opportunity of, I'm not only going to provide you sound, but I also have the expertise to be able to implement it for you in your context.
I would also add that if you're looking to get more sort of variety of input on this, just if you're local here, we have a game development community here. We have the IGDA that meets monthly. There's various meetups for different engines. Just come start talking to local people who are in the process of making games, and you'll get a lot of like very specific, what are the challenges they're running into from an audio perspective.
I just also wanted to add though too, we talked a little bit about, but all the engines have great communities. Not only for getting assets and kind of solving problems that they might have, but also there are kind of talent marketplaces in those communities as well. So if you are, basically you could go on there and just put out an ad saying, I'm looking for projects, I'm a musician, or want to do sound engineer, something like that, for any projects that you guys might have. And vice versa, you might see somebody on there that's looking for a position that you could fill. So that it's kind of like LinkedIn, but Unity has one and Unreal they all have their own spaces like that too.
I was thinking of going to the previous game jam in order to do that, but I didn't know if that would be the right place. And also my music production studio is not mobile. It's not a lot of components to it. So
I see, yeah. Yeah. I think the best is, it's not the easiest thing, but if it's not intuitive to you, but look at some of the engines or look at the way that sound engine is engineered specifically for games. Just see what is interesting for you in that. All the way in the back.
Yeah, so as somebody who's like graduating out from the computer science field, what are some things that I can do to like build my resume or things that would like look good to a game development company? And also, are there any like hotspots or any areas to live in where it might be able to help out a little bit more with finding a job, that kind of thing?
Programmer question.
I mean, this is sort of like, it's the exact same answer as if you were graduating with an art degree. You make something. Like, just sit down and say, this weekend I'm working on X. and I'm going to make something. Pick an engine, it doesn't matter which one, show that you can build something. You can learn to understand how it works, implement some of the major systems, like use physics, use networking if you feel up to that, do some shader, use a particle system, make a shader, like hit all these areas and show, look, I know how to use all the stuff, and maybe you're better at some than others, but you demonstrate that you're capable.
I'd say in general for the game industry, we look at people who are able to finish projects. So it's not just about making things, but show that you can do that final 10%, which we often say is the other 90% of the work on a game project. That demonstration of here's my portfolio, here's a game that I've started, finished, especially if you can show that you've shipped it, even if it's for free, if it's something that I can see on Steam, I can download on iOS or a mobile phone, that demonstrates to us that you have that capability to take something from start to finish, which is 50% of the battle in terms of getting your foot in the door in the industry as a whole.
And as far as like the locales for different big groups of game studios, Austin is really huge. The San Francisco Bay Area is also huge. Washington State, Seattle area is also huge, and LA is huge as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you're able to move and live in those places without a job for a little while. I mean, we talked about it yesterday a bit more on the AZ game industry panel. I mean, Phoenix and Arizona are great places as far as cost of living compared to any of those other. The biggest issue that we have here is just connecting and finding talent and collaborating. And so that's, again, why we do this stuff. That's why we do the showcase. That's why we do this. That's why we have IGDA. That's why we do the game jams and things. It's just to connect and bring people together. So there are also spaces online, and you go to IGDA, you can go to our Facebook page, and just find people that way too. And sometimes there are connections here that will also spur off, further connections in some of these other places. The game industry itself, it feels like a really kind of, I mean, it isn't, but it's because it's growing all the time, but it still feels pretty close-knit. Like when you go to GDC, there are faces that you see regularly at that, at that conference and stuff. So we often talked about it at the university. It's also a lot about reputation in the industry. So just keep cranking on things, building stuff, even if it's small pieces or a full game. Again, looking at the stores, what they're offering on Unity or Unreal, that could give you an idea of what people find useful or interesting or innovative, and that can be another way to kind of just focus yourself. Because I know when you're at the beginning, it's like so big, and just you get overwhelmed, and everything from a little phone game to a giant AAA game, and so on and so on. And where do you want to fit in, and what do you want to do? You just have to pick something. Start it, do it, finish it, like Brandon said, and then go to the next thing. So, yeah, in the years.
So I guess kind of to that point that was just made, how do you actually keep motivated on a project that you're doing?
Money.
I would say, like, if you're doing it yourself, like, mix it up, because I've worked on side projects on my own, and if you focus on one thing and you feel like you're getting stuck and it sort of becomes a bit of a doldrum, it's a game. And you can go to something else, do lighting or do something else for a little while, and then come back to it, because there's just so much to learn. It's always going to be fresh. So.
Chris can probably speak to this and sort of mention the schedule. One thing that I find really useful is finding other people who are also in that process of making games, and just buddy system style, hey, what if we got together Sundays at 5 to 7? I'll host and then you host, and one of us cooks dinner or something like that, and just so you have that regular commitment of, oh, I really don't want to work on it today. Oh, but they're expecting me, or they're coming over. I kind of have to. You're kind of on the hook for it. That sort of commitment device where you keep yourself moving along, and then you have someone to talk to about your problems. If you're like, I'm really stuck on this, I don't know what to do, or I really don't, this doesn't feel right, I feel like I'm in a dead end. You have someone to bounce ideas off, and often just talking about your problem is enough to get you unstuck.
As a designer as well, something that I find motivating in the later stages of development is get your game in the hands of people. Few things are as motivating as seeing people interact with the thing that you've built, sometimes really positively in that they have a great experience and that motivates you to push it sort of further. More often than not, they have a partially negative experience, or they run into and encounter something that sets kind of a fire under you to go and address that issue or work that much harder to sort of push it over the finish line. Always be playtesting your game as early as conceivable.
Shovel Knight?
Best way to learn how to program. To start programming.
I got a computer science degree, so no. But here's actually the best way. Like, I would start with an existing game and just change it. Like, actually, my first time programming was actually like basic, and I downloaded this game. It was called Gorillas, and you just like threw these cheap bananas at each other. But you could deconstruct it and see, like, you could tweak numbers and just see what happens when you tweak those numbers. So start with a game, and like, again, with these asset stores, you can just download a full game and then just start tweaking it and changing numbers, and you'll kind of see how the stuff works. So I wouldn't try and like code from nothing and then try and make, you know, Elder Scrolls or something. Don't do that. Please don't do that. If you learn anything, don't make old Elder Scrolls. Don't do that.
Or you can make an MMO. That'd be even better.
Oh yeah, with open world too.
Yeah.
But anyway,
They do
start
have modding
small
on
and
those.
deconstruct existing games. I think that's the best way to learn.
Yeah, I mean, you can mod your favorite games most often too. So, you know, take a look on Steam. Sometimes you can download the engine that they're actually using as well as the game. Yeah, and then there are increasingly number of games that are built around that. Just gonna leave it there.
Along the process of learning sort of game development programming, you don't necessarily have to start learning in games. I know that's like the endpoint that we all want to get to. Games are some of the most complex software that you can imagine, just because there's so many systems going. You could just start with like some JavaScript on a website. That's a perfectly like fine place to start, and then translate that when you feel a little bit more confident into the game. If the game is really the primary driver for why you want to learn programming, that's the reason I learned to program, that's the reason I went to college. But then I found that I actually enjoyed programming for its own sake. So you might try just programming in a little simpler environment first, get your feet underneath you, and then translate that into games. And I would suggest people start with 2D games, because you have a lot less to worry about in a 2D environment, and then go to 3D.
But was there something new? Because I have, yeah, and I'll get you guys.
Yeah, just so I know one of the things is just always about like
just make it.
is how do you go about getting, I guess, kind of funding for a project? When you come up with an idea, what's a common strategy you guys have for like maybe going about funding for your passion project or something like that?
It's a bad question.
Don't mortgage your house. Please don't mortgage your house. I know I'm from the man, but please don't mortgage your house. Yeah, but I self-fund all my stuff. So I don't know. Find out what's really passionate and see if you, before you like start getting money, make a little thing. And have you made a game yet or released?
Yeah, and well, that was the thing is I've always wondered is like, because I always hear these people go like, oh, I started like, they created this game, but like my always thought was like, well, did they get outside funding or did they just kind of save some of their paycheck, you know, like, and that's kind of that's always been my question is like, at a small level, how do you fund? Because I know, you know, because I heard earlier is that they'll some people will go to a publisher, some will try to convince a publisher to fund them, and others will go through like a GoFundMe account. And now my question is just kind of like, are there ways that are better than others, or is kind of any way?
Let me speak to I work for mainly for the man, the publisher. So there's the bad guy, the evil person, okay? And my job was to look at titles, look at developers' stuff, and determine if we wanted to fund it or not. So that's specifically what I did. We did the Deer Hunter games and things like this. And what I looked at is I wanted to know if it's going to make money. I mean, I'm the evil publisher, so it has to make money, right? And so you can have a million ideas, but I'm looking for the one that I think is going to have the best potential, right? And even if there's several with potential, we can only find so many. So if you're trying to get funding from a publisher, have something the publisher wants, okay? And it can't be, because I've always wanted to make this lawn mowing game that me and 3 other people in the world will like. You know, you have to think, what's my audience for this? And I have a whole speech I was going to do in a different context, but it's what game to build. You need to know what to build, okay? Because there's a million of the same type of games out there. You know, the Alien Attack the Earth game, and so making the million and first version of that is probably going to be very difficult to even if you made it on your own from A to Z and published it, maybe no one will download it. So if it's a publisher, come up with something they want, Okay, if it's you're going to do something like an indie game, or if you're going to do a GoFundMe type of thing, you still have to appeal to an audience, right? So you have to consider, what am I building and why?
Yeah, and I don't think you need to make like a complete product and be like, here's this thing, sell it for me and put it on the shelves. I think you can make like a demo that's like a really, you've seen game demos, everybody has. It's like really schnazzy and like, really draws people in and shows off a bit of like the gameplay that may be different from anything anyone's ever done. That would be basically your business card that you're giving them and saying, hey, fulfill my dream and give me some money so I can finish this thing. And so it doesn't have to be this full product that has everything but the credits in it.
But I would recommend, if you're going to go either the crowdfunding route or the publisher route, they're pretty much the same. You have your publisher is all the people giving you money. They're both looking at this point for something that's pretty close to the same, a very full, complete looking vertical slice of your final product. It can't just be like, at one point, 6 years ago, whatever, you could have a Kickstarter with an idea and a trailer that had a voiceover and no actual gameplay. And now people want to download the demo of the thing. They want to get, there's the tier that gets you immediate access to the game. Like you're far along into that process. So you're going to have to get to that point where you've built something non-trivial on your own dime before you're really going to be able to bring in outside funding, unless you have some. You have to get it pretty far along before you start shopping it around.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to almost anything else. If you're an entrepreneur of some type, a great example again is Comic Fest. You see a lot of people out there selling their stuff. How do they get there, and how are they making that money, and why are they selling what they're selling? I find it interesting. I walk the floor thinking, okay, why are they selling these kind of prints or this kind of stuff at this time of year, at this year particularly? Is there a reason? What's selling better than other things? And it's a similar thing in the game industry. So you want to take a look at where the trends are, but also what are you interested in, and what are you capable of, and what would they be interested in of you, right? So where's that value that you're showing? And I love games because they're so dynamic and crazy, and you can do kind of all kinds of different things, right? And you always hear the way that these things pop up, right? I mean, PUBG, who knew that was going to be there? Fortnite, who knew that was going to be that big? Even Minecraft came from just an issue that he had of, I want to make a game, but this game I made, the crafting sucks, so I'm going to go over here and just start, twiddling around with doing a crafting simulator, and next thing you know, he's got Minecraft, and it's huge. So I think there's just some fascinating way. You have to think of it that way as, how are you going to sustain yourself living on this and doing this? And does it mean that you have a job working during the day? Or does it mean that you're just really hustling all the time? It depends by person. The publisher's probably not going to show you too much care at all, unless you have a demo, like you said, or you have a reputation, right? Those are the things. An IP, a reputation. If you don't have that, then show them that you have skills. Yeah.
So this is for programming and otherwise, but as you're making a game, what's the documentation? How do you take everything that you're doing and hand it to somebody else or hand it to yourself in the future, and how do you demonstrate, all right, these are all the things I do, this is how I can do it again?
Very carefully. So, numerous programs that people use for documentation, and every designer, programmer, artist will have a different style to it. The most important thing to understand when you go through the process of documentation is, like with game development, understand your audience. So actually work with the designers or artists that are going to be using this documentation as reference for making the systems within the game, and discuss with them the style of communication that you have and whether they are receiving that on the other end. So you'll run a few test runs. I go and write sample documents when welcoming a new member into the team or starting a new game project. Be very deliberate about your details and organization. So when breaking down a game system, it can be easy to be tempted to just write it from sort of a player perspective, just what does the end product look like? And if you're writing general design documentation for, say, a business presentation, that can be okay. But if you're writing for programming, you want to talk systemically about the systems that you're building. If you're talking about art, it's more about the visual design, the atmosphere, as well as being able to speak some of the technical languages on your technical art side.
And there's a huge variation. If it's if you're the team, you probably don't need a tremendous amount of documentation. If there's 30 people on your team or 40 people on your team, you're going to have a much more formal documentation process. So like Brandon's saying, it's going to depend on the people you're working with. What do they need? Are they fairly technical themselves? Is there someone on their team that you can communicate it to and they can pass it along? They may have specific things they're looking for. It's going to vary pretty widely depending on your circumstances.
And kind of like a second part to this question, is for design and for being specifically, are there any kinds of industry standard methods of documentation or like formats that would be something that you could easily look up and learn about?
So in terms of formats or tools, I would say the industry has sort of moved on from what had been established as your big hulking document that's called the general design document that's like 900 pages and describes every aspect of your game. We don't do that anymore by and large. It's moved to more of a wiki-based system because they're just fundamentally more searchable. That's also just kind of understanding human psychology a bit. Even if you hand a programmer a 900-page document and say, check page 59 for the technical system you're working on, they're probably not going to read it. Versus a wiki system that's organized by category of like programming system related to player controllers, here's the 3 pages related to that. So digesting the documentation into bite-sized chunks. Atlassian tools are becoming increasingly common at the really high professional end. They can be a bit pricey, especially at the indie development level, but things like Confluence for documentation, Jira for bug tracking are really common. Great free resources that can do a lot of that work for you though, just use the Google Docs suite. You can use a combination of that and many available free wiki systems to sort of spread your documentation out.
Yeah, I mean, Atlassian also has Trello, so it's probably still free, right? I mean, you can get a paid version, but Trello's good. I mean, so there are tools like that, so documentation tools. There are also methodologies about project management, right? So you could, I mean, Scrum, right, with Agile is one, Kanban, and these other ways of kind of following different, basically, however you break it down in your tasks, right? And that's where you kind of mentioned how the complexity is up to you, depending on how many people you have and so on. But there are definitely ways that you can research on how to keep yourself organized and on task, and make sure that you're doing the right steps at the right time. Because sometimes we get excited about ideas and we say, let's do this, and then you realize, oh, we don't have that foundation built, we can't even get anywhere near that.
And just one last thing. How would you go about scrumming with yourself? If you're just one person, how do you go about...
A mirror, a tape recorder.
How do you go about doing an agile process with just you?
Man, that's a good question.
I just wouldn't. I mean, I don't. I don't do it. Like, I mean, I'm a solo developer, so don't. Just make stuff. Like, I mean, documentation is not deliverable. Like, your audience doesn't care about how well you documented your stuff. Just do it. Just make stuff.
And honestly, like from a coding standpoint, I think there's a lot to be said for like writing pseudocode. Like, don't worry about the context or anything. Just you're writing out exactly what you want the game to do, and then you look at it and you're like, I have a bunch of these systems I don't know anything about. Pick one of them, start learning about it, try and implement that. Put a check mark next to it when it's done, then go to the next one. And then you have a document of what you did, what you need to do, what things are still confusing, and all that. So I mean, I think that could work really well too.
Gotcha, thanks.
Yes.
So I'm a lifelong designer who's been teaching himself to develop for the past 10 years or so, many long nights on Stack Overflow. And I built a game on Android using libgdx, and I chose libgdx because it was free, and Android because that's the phone I had, and frankly because iOS world scared me a little bit because of the annual cost, not knowing if I was going to stick with us or not. So I'm just curious on your advice for people who are bootstrapping it themselves, as far as a good path economically, as far as choosing game engine, choosing the right platform.
I would generally say that unless you have a really good reason, dropping down something as low level as libgdx is a little rough, because then when you want to go to iOS, you don't have a tremendous amount of shared resources to move between them. So this is the place where the Unities and the Unreals are super handy. Unity especially excels at this. Not having to worry about any of that stuff allows you to just kind of click the publish button on the platform and move on, and you can worry about your actual game that you're producing. So I would probably, unless those platforms fail you in some way, And it doesn't have to be those. I mean, there's Game Maker can do mobile. Like, there's a lot of different platforms that can get you there. But I would rely on one of those to take care of all those issues, because there's so many cross-platform, like, nuanced problems on all these devices that you kind of want that to be someone else's problem. And there's not a great solution for that at a lower level than like the engines right now. There's no like libGDX Pro that you can pay for that just works cross-platform. I'd love it if someone wants to go invent that. I would totally use that myself. But for now, I would probably pick someone who's been down that road and just pay them the money to make that problem go away.
Yeah, and another thing too, just as somebody, maybe you want to get into games, but you don't actually know fully if that's going to be your thing. And the current engines like Unity and Unreal are actually, I mean, super powerful and can go beyond just games. So you can create some really, really cool experiences. You can do cinematic stuff. I mean, a lot of the Hollywood movies that you're seeing now use Unreal Engine for all of their animations because the physics are in there, because they're just really robust. And you can do, I mean, you can set up, you can do 2D, 3D, you can set up all kinds of very interesting experiments inside these spaces that, again, you can just kind of figure out as you go along. And the other thing I wanted to say is, when you're kind of talking about that, it brought me up to one of the students back in the classes that I had, started off with Construct, but the thing was, he was making a mobile game, and he just got to a point where there was an issue that he had with the game, with what he wanted to do, and he just did all the research and then realized, you know what, Construct actually doesn't allow me to do this one little thing that I want to do in this game. So he, you know, that's the time where you're like, oh, okay, well, I learned all this, now what do I do, right? And for him, it was switched to another engine because he really wanted to get that taken care of. He could also have said, I'll change my game, and instead do that. So, you know, there's a lot of problem solving that goes on in this in general, and I just think that it's just really exciting to see where these engines are today and what you can do with them. Yeah, I thought so.
Do you have any advice for the kids who want to make games?
Do it. Yeah. I'm not joking. Just there's no barrier that you cannot demolish. Like, you have the entire internet, giant community that wants to help you. Pick something you want to do. Pick something very small. Again, that weekend project, and just start working on it.
Like a very short time ago, all this stuff we're talking about, all these game engines were like either proprietary or so expensive, they'd like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in giant license fees just to use them. And they were, you know, a commercial product that was sold for lots of money. And all that stuff that went into making all those products over all those years is now free. And the internet will answer just about any question you have, and there is no excuse for not just diving in. If you love it enough to want to do it, do it.
Totally. I agree. I wish I would have had all this stuff.
No, me too.
Made life so easy. Any other questions? Yeah.
So I have kind of a business management question. So when you're in that area where you're about to release a game, you know, some other things, some other resources, and you're kind of starting pre-production for the next project, how do you manage having resources between those two areas? So let's say you need to get funding, but you have to finish pre-production yet for your next project, and you're kind of in that dead area where you don't want to let your staff go. You want to make sure you have enough funds to let people go. Like, what are some of the resources or tools that you guys would actually recommend or look into making sure you can keep doing your game at that point in time? Because you're not going to release the game and make, you know, $20,000 overnight. It's going to trickle in over a couple of months. What would you guys suggest?
Yeah, I would say that I don't know that there's a tool, process, methodology that's going to solve that problem beyond just appropriate pre-planning. You try to phase and schedule out your game development ahead of time so that you know how much buffer room you need to have the next project line up, the next set of funding lined up before your previous project ends. That entails a fair bit of overhead. I mean, there's absolutely the case where some of the same resources will be tapped finishing the prior game, doing the marketing for the prior game. If it's a smaller team, might be the same people that are going out and doing the hustling and finding the next set of funding for the next project. But you always want to plan out not just 2-game release and then we fall off a cliff and run out of money. if at all possible, release game and then here's the next 3-4 months set of funding are already baked into that schedule so that you have time to ramp up into the next project, and you're not falling into that cycle where you do have to let people go and then find yourself 3 months later saying, okay, now we're hiring again, please come back. If you find an answer or tool for that though, please let us all know. The industry would really benefit from it.
Yeah.
With like story-driven games, do you recommend to do like a episodic game, or try to make a game that's has multiple chapters if you're starting out?
I mean, I think it'd probably be easier to just to do the episodic type thing, because you can obviously, with a great story you can cover up a multitude of sins essentially. Like if you have a great story and gameplay to go along with it, you'll draw people into the next episode and the next episode. I haven't really seen a lot of games like that have been super successful, so I think there's a lot of room for something like that. I mean, it's similar to the structure we all, Game of Thrones or any of these other like really great shows that people just are sort of on the edge of their seat to see from a weekly standpoint. I haven't really seen games delivered in that same fashion. So
You might want to check out Kentucky Route Zero. That's an indie game it's done episodically, and it's a really rich story. I wouldn't recommend building that if you're doing it, but I mean, you're wearing a Pip-Boy, right? I mean, I would just make like a character like in that engine. I mean, you can mod that engine, I think, I'm pretty sure, right? And just make a little story with like one character, and like it's a mission for one character. And start small, and then just release, and you'll just build up, and you'll learn those skills. So I would start small with just one character.
If you're looking at like an episodic structure though, that's sort of like your financial decision, right? Of like, how long can we go before we have to release this thing? If we can only get one chapter out and then we got to get some money in, that's a reason to go episodic. Just know that you're sort of, every episode after the first one will have less people buying it than the first one, right? Because someone's not going to buy episode 3 without episode 1, generally speaking. So the new episodes have to somehow continue to grow that initial episode 1 and through, or else you kind of can peak early and then trail off pretty hard. And then your motivation to keep making them is lower and lower, and it's kind of this death spiral you get into.
I mean, from a consumer standpoint, if I'm playing like these Telltale games, right, or if everybody here has at least binge watched Netflix, right, to some capacity. You have these shows that will give you these cliffhangers. These cliffhangers give us, psychology, the known, like what do we want to know more about this? We need to know more about this. And if you can end it that way, if you're only starting with one episode, I mean, that's going to really help a lot, bring visibility, to your product, because everybody wants to know what's going to happen next.
That is a choice that you want to make early on in the process, though, rather than arrive to it because, I need to make money because I ran out of money, so I'm going to make my game episodic. Because what you can't do is go and make one story and then just release 1/5 of it, where you have built into the setup in your first episode is just all the setup without rising and falling action and some kind of resolution to it. So when you go out and set an episodic game, you want to know that each episode tells a complete story. That can be part of a wider arc, but it needs to be a satisfying experience in of itself, and somebody could just play that episode and walk away feeling like they got their money's worth. Otherwise, you'll run into the people won't buy the second, third, fourth episode.
Another question? Over here.
How do you learn what numbers are fun, especially in RPG or something?
What numbers are fun?
Yeah.
3's a magic number.
How much damage to do?
I
Experimentation.
mean, we can probably both speak to that. The first thing I would do is I would take a game that is moddable in some fashion, Fallout or something, take some game and start changing numbers and see when it stops being fun, and try to work out why you think it stops being fun. Like if you take damage and we increase damage to infinity, the game will cease to be fun. Well, that's not entirely true. It will probably cease to be fun for most people, and it will probably be more fun for a certain period of time for some people, right? For different reasons. And you work out why that is. For a different group of people, you could cut the damage in half, and it might become more fun because now it's much more challenging. Like fun is so subjective. You have to understand what is kind of the right number for the right person, for the right situation, for the right kind of game. So I would take existing games, tweak them, and see if you can take one game and make it fun for different audiences just by changing the numbers around.
Yeah, Dave's absolutely right. You want to experiment and look for that sustained engagement. And the sustained part of it is really important because if I'll shill my own game for a little bit here, the Endless Mission, we have modding tools that allow you to go and modify properties in the game in runtime. So it's very easy to go and test what happens if I make my damage 3-4x higher? What happens if I make my platforming character jump significantly higher? And the first temptation for a lot of game players is I'm going to turn the knobs all the way up. And that is a lot of fun. And you'll see the laughing and the engagement, and it feels like I have superpowers within the game. But that is fun for minutes, a little micro engagement. But what sort of that next step of your design elevation becomes is what is going to return people to the game to want to encourage them to grow more powerful if it's an RPG mechanic. So you build a little bit of an intuitive sense of that from playing games of a similar genre, deciding for yourself what is fun and why am I finding this fun. And then once you get into the implementation stage, it's about testing that often with an audience. You go and even make 4 different versions of your game that test 4 different values and test that all at the same time and notice how and why people are returning for an engagement for the game that you've made.
And also there was a recent article, I can't remember where I read it, but they were talking about like under the hood what games do to kind of fudge the numbers. If you know people come back to like the same boss like 4 or 5 times and they can't get past it, they'll have logic in there that will actually fudge the numbers. So it'll allow them to keep engaged in the game without just getting their butt beat every single time. So I would say ultimately it has to be fun. It has to be engaging for all the players, regardless of their skill set. So I consider that cheating under the hood is totally within the scope of making games.
And consider your audience. Actually, something to point out with our game, the guy who was the engine guy, he built a kart game before he built ours. And in kart games like Mario, even your 4-year-old kid can keep up with the parent because the car is rubber banding. The slowest car is yanked forward and the fastest car is slowed down, right? It makes sense to do that so everyone can have a good experience. But when you're doing a realistic racing game, it wouldn't make sense that your car, the back gets sped up and the cars in the front are slowed down. It'd be, to the people who like more realistic games, that would be annoying to them. So consider your audience whenever you make those adjustments. So.
Sure. Cool. Well, it's 5:30 on the nose. Thank you everybody for coming out here. If you guys give the panelists a round of applause. If you got a few questions I think we can answer. I don't know if anybody's coming in, if you want to come up and talk to them. Otherwise, a lot of them will be at the showcase later today. So. And join us tomorrow night at the park if you guys can make it.
When's the showcase?